Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. I'm at Hotspur Way, Tottenham's training ground. I've just done Ange Postecoglou's press conference, previewing the Aston Villa game on Sunday. It's not much time after the horrendous night before up at Liverpool. I wasn't at the game, but obviously Ange was. They got back about 2 a.m. this morning. He looked pretty tired, to be honest. The press conference was at 10:30 a.m. UK time, so it gives you an idea of how quick the turnaround was. I don't think he really slept too much. I wouldn't say his energy levels were absolutely buzzing, as you wouldn't expect. After a game anyway like that, and the lack of sleep, he looked. I suppose it was just quite I don't want to say downbeat, but it's like a quieter tone. There was no sort of real sort of emotion either way, really. It was just quite a tired press conference, understandably so. Still made some very articulate points, as he always does. But yeah, it was. You could tell it had been a difficult night the night before, and a lack of sleep the night before. Anyway, let's move on to some of the key points from the open section of the press conference. So there are a fair few bits. I suppose one of the things that emerged from the wreckage of last night in the 4-0 defeat at Liverpool was some of the very strong pundit comments, from Jamie Redknapp, sort of saying he'd never seen a team with as much on the line as Spurs had last night. Have less have what's the phrase? Put up as little a fight as Spurs did. Michael Dawson said it was a damaging defeat, and sort of questioned the player's character, to be honest. And then Jamie Carragher made observations about Tottenham generally, and how they always struggle in big games like this, and it never seemed to really surprise you, and that's kind of always been the way. And even sort of suggested that Accrington Stanley had him perform better at Liverpool than Tottenham did. I feel like a lot of those comments, even though they must be hard to hear from a Spurs point of view, and particularly Postecoglou, weren't without. Well, it's not like they weren't valid, to be fair, but they were put to Ange after the game yesterday in the press conference. He was asked about Redknapp and his comments in particular, and he sort of brushed it off and didn't really want to talk about. He said it didn't really matter to him. Pundits have a role to play on TV effectively, but he didn't really care what they had to say, and he kind of had more of the same today. He said he sort of understood the pile-on. He said Tottenham are an easy mark at the moment, given what they're going through. He made a little bit of a sarcastic remark about the fact that obviously making a semi-final was a disaster, and it would have been better had they gone out earlier in the competition. And I suppose you can make a sort of, even though he was being sort of a bit sarky over it, I suppose you could make a case that had they gone out to Man City, back in that round where before the whole Man City collapse came about, which was sparked by that defeat at Tottenham, then there probably wouldn't have been as much sort of heat on Tottenham because it was half expected. But now, because of the way the league season has gone and what a massive game this was for their season, and to lose in such a convincing manner, the heat is perhaps on Spurs more than it would have been earlier in the competition. But that's just the way it goes, to be fair, when you get so close to having that opportunity to end obviously 17 years of hurt from Tottenham's point of view with the lack of trophies, but also find a way to have a glorious end to what's been a very difficult season all round, which is what, to be fair to Ange, he's the one who the day before the game, in response to my question, in fairness, talked about how massive a victory it would be for the club right now, for the club going forward, and has also reiterated the point that there is sort of the possibility of glory in amidst the difficult elements of this season. So I don't think it's unfair to fans to be particularly disappointed on that front when it went as wrong as it did. But also, getting to not know Ange, but get a feel for how he is in these media engagements that we've had over 18 months. It didn't surprise me that even if he wasn't going to come, lashing out at pundits, he also had a few sort of little side points that sort of it seemed to hint at how he felt about them. He reiterated the point that he still has great belief in the players. I mean, to be honest, throughout this season, when it's been going, roughly at times, I can only think of, specifically individual players, is the Timo Werner situation at Rangers. I don't know if the fact that he's a lone player played into that or what, but that was the only time he's really sort of castigated a player publicly. He hasn't really done that on an individual basis. Most managers don't generally anyway. Always playing with fire if you go down that route. But he's only done that once with Werner. And to be honest, it's not very often that he's really sort of hit out at the players generally as a sort of group. I can think of the Arsenal game where I thought, to be honest, I was kind of surprised at how strong he was, about how annoyed he was at how passive the team were and how they didn't play how he wanted them to play, which was reiterated here against Liverpool, but in less sort of impassioned tones. And he didn't seem to be as sort of making the point as much as he was there at Arsenal. And generally, he's been very supportive of the players. I suppose, to be honest, a cynic would say he would have to be, given how it's been going this season, because if he loses the players, then it would be a really difficult situation for him. But you do genuinely get the sense, or perhaps it's just the powers of Postecoglou's rhetoric and persuasiveness, that I'm won over by how genuine he seems when he says all these things about the players. And there's also no denying, and this is what maybe was lost a little bit on the analysis last night on TV, because perhaps by this point it's getting boring to keep talking about injuries, but you cannot. It's not a wholly excuse. You can't use it only as the only reason why it's been going wrong this season. But once again, without I think double figures of first team players, and key first team players at that, there has to be factored in. But yeah, and on that note, on injured players, no players back for this one, unfortunately. If anything, it's worse now because Richarlison's now injured. We don't know how bad it is. He obviously came off with a calf problem. I think all Spurs fans will be half expecting it to be a bad one given Richarlison's injury history. We don't know. Obviously, the turnaround to this press conference after last night was way too soon to expect a proper update on that, but I think you can pretty much rule him out of the Villa game. Be stunned if he played. And Ange talked about how really disappointed Richie was after the game, given how hard he worked to get back, how emotional apparently he was after it, which sort of hinted at presumably it's going to be a problem for him. And it's frustrating, isn't it? I don't think Richarlison had an amazing game last night, although I did overlook in my post-match video, which if you haven't seen, go check it out, the incident with Van Dijk. I thought at the time when Van Dijk caught him with an elbow, it was a bit naughty, but I don't think it was a red card. I didn't at the time. Although having said that, when you watch, I do think when it's slowed down, it looks worse. And there are some angles that I've seen on social media which look pretty intentional. And I can see why Richarlison wasn't happy, and I can sort of understand why some fans are not happy on that front. And then it did seem a bit unnecessary. I know Richarlison, particularly with his Everton history and just how he can be, I think he can be viewed by some players as a bit of a wind-up merchant. It still felt like a bit beneath Van Dijk to go and do that whole thing with the handshake, or the lack of handshake, pretending to give a handshake and then take it away to Richarlison, which was picked up on social media. It seemed a bit petty, put it that way. Anyway, but Richarlison, frustrating, came off, and yes, he didn't have a big impact before he got injured, but I think generally when he's played for Ange, he's been, and that's the rub of the whole situation, when he's played for Ange, not anywhere near enough as you would hope, but when he has, he's been a very effective player, and actually his goal return's pretty good. So that is a blow. That is a hammer blow if he's injured for a while, which I think we're all bracing ourselves for that to happen. Fingers crossed it's not. But not only that, none of the players back, which, it wasn't that long ago that Ange was saying 7 to 10 days for the likes of Maddison, Vicario, Odegaard, Udogie, Werner, Johnson, and then you've got the likes of, obviously, Romero and Van der Ven in their situation. You thought maybe there's an outside chance even of playing on Thursday, let alone this Sunday, but they're not going to be back for that, unfortunately. And also Dane Scarlett, who was cup tied against Liverpool, is also cup tied against Villa. Because he played for Oxford earlier in the competition earlier. So I guess it turns to Matisse Tell to step up after his debut, a difficult debut when he came on last night. Hopefully he can start from the beginning and really show why fans are really excited. Spurs definitely could do with a lift, and maybe he can provide it at the weekend. And I think a lot of criticism came the senior players' way, both from the pundits and from fans yesterday, feeling like some of them just didn't play well enough and didn't step up enough. Some was copying a bit of flack, seeing as he's the captain. I feel like he's played better of late, but I did think he was didn't have much anywhere near as much of an impact as you'd hope, even though he hit the bar in the second half. So I kind of feel like the criticism of him is kind of fair, even though he looks dead on his feet from all these games. I thought it was quite notable that the players who were really trying to play Postecoglou's football were the youngsters and the new signings. So I thought Kevin Danso was the one sort of ray of light in this game. His passing was quite ambitious and positive and accurate, and that's something to hopefully look towards as a positive going forward. He does seem, at least on that evidence of that game, a pretty good fit for the way he wants to play. And the fact that Spence moved to right wing, I sort of consider him as part of the young players. I mean, he's not old at all, but he's not as young as obviously the teenagers. But I think it was quite telling that he went there, and it was also quite telling that Bissouma came off. Bissouma, it's a frustrating one, isn't it? Because when you think to that amazing initial start to Postecoglou, and particularly that first month, where I thought Bissouma was arguably the player of the season in that first month. He was had such an impact, was playing so well, definitely the most improved. A key part of all that was how fearless he was in that sort of base of midfield, breaking the press, dribbling around players, taking on players, showing ambition and setting up attacks in this really positive front foot style. And yesterday against Liverpool, I think he almost embodied a fear when they finally got the ball, Tottenham, particularly from the senior players in the attacking and midfield positions, to do anything with it. And it wasn't a surprise. It was he who lost the ball, obviously, for the key opener. And when he got hooked, I wasn't shocked either. But Ange was asked specifically, and it felt like Bissouma would be sort of player number one on this front. Whether some of these senior players have kind of had their time now, and whether it's time for to almost sort of dismiss them at this point because they've had these games quite regularly where they've disappointed, I suppose. And Ange actually hit back on that. He was very defensive of the senior players. He said that if anything, they've been carrying them at times this season. They've really for his money, they really have stepped up, even if fans might not see it that way. And also the point about just sort of leaving players out because they've maybe had one too many chances. He made the point like they haven't got that option. I suppose he could have started Bergvall last night, and that's a big question mark over team selection. But that's pretty much the only other option he could have had. And I presume he left Bergvall out from the beginning because of the amount of games he's played recently. So even if you were of the mind that Bissouma, for example, has had his time at Tottenham, I don't think Spurs, the window's just shut and they've got a lot of games to come. I don't think they're really in the position in any way to sort of dismiss players like that as and cast them aside. No chance of that. And that was kind of what Andrew was saying, and he was being quite defensive with the senior players, really. Trying to think of anything else that sort of came up that was relevant in the open section. He's asked whether it was a good thing he had a couple of days before Villa for a reaction, but he said he'd much prefer having 8 days to prepare. It's just another quick turnaround with so many games. He himself said Danso was really good. He really was, he was impressed with him, and he was actually impressed with Tell, even though it was under trying circumstances. He was asked about the pressure going into this game, because obviously pressure on his own position, pressure on Tottenham this season after that defeat against Liverpool, and a damaging defeat at that. You may potentially, he's pretty adept with answering questions like that. He gives, from a journalist point of view, enough to sort of write about the fact that his future is a talking point. But he doesn't really say anything that sort of puts himself in a difficult position. He said it's the same pressure going into this cup game as it was in the last game. He obviously made the reference about all the injured players. As I said, it's 11 players now, and he said the main objective, or one of the main objectives at Villa, is to get back to playing the football that they want to play, which is, on a final point, quite concerning, really, how they played against Liverpool. If that's not how Postecoglou wants his side to play, I would say, given that quite obviously, to my eyes, they went for a different approach of trying to effectively defend their way through a game. It seems hard to me to imagine that's literally just the players making the decision to do that, and not Postecoglou's approach I imagine it's a bit of both. Maybe players being a bit more cautious than he would like, but I cannot believe that there wasn't a tactical approach to say, look, particularly the fullbacks, for example, don't push on as much as they do in an ideal Postecoglou game, or play as deep as they did. But either way, Ange didn't like how passive the team were. Like he said the same thing after Arsenal, and he wants to see a bit more of a positive approach when it comes to Villa. It's a quick turnaround. No players coming back to help. If anything, it's got worse injury-wise. But let's think, at least last season, it wasn't as Spurs weren't anywhere near as bad a situation as they have been this year going to Villa Park. But I feel like when they went to Villa last year, they were starting to fall behind Villa in that race for fourth, which ultimately they lost. But it did feel like quite a pivotal game in that race at that moment. And they had a few sort of dodgy results, the 2-2 draw at Everton. Really, the bad results sort of came after Villa, ironically. But at that point, it felt quite crucial. And they went and won 4-0, and one of his best results since being here, with a sort of absolute onslaught in the second half. Goals from everyone, including Werner, of all people, right at the end. Having said that, I think it was Son, Maddison, Werner, and I forget who else scored, and at least two of those, Maddison and Werner, won't be playing in the game, which shows you the situation he's got in terms of players missing. But I suppose Villa, generally this season, haven't looked infallible at home. They always seem like they can concede a goal. And Spurs have generally played quite well against them at times under Postecoglou, not always, but sometimes they have. Definitely earlier this season with a 4-1. So that should give them some sort of optimism going into this game. And they'll definitely they've got to make, more of an impact going forward than they did against Liverpool. As difficult as Anfield is, to have not a shot on target is pretty damning of that performance. Just lastly on the team lineup, it's probably not that hard to call it because there's such a lack of players, but Kinski again in goal. Porro comes back into the team surely, having been left on the bench. Well, not left on the bench, came on off the bench in the second half, didn't he? I think Porro, I think Danso. Actually, thinking about it, it's a bit of a question mark over the centre backs. I think maybe Davis and Spence, and then I wonder if Gray may start in midfield. Be quite a shout, but given how Basuma and Sarr performed, maybe this is the time to give Archie a chance in the middle of midfield. Let's see. Let's maybe say that, but also I would not be surprised if that wasn't the case, because he hasn't generally gone for that. Bergvall, I think, comes into the team. Bentancur probably keeps his place, even though I don't think he was particularly good at Liverpool. And then Tell through the middle, Kulusevski wide right and Son wide left. Don't think you start Mikey Moore, but I guess it's an option. But that's what I would go for. Let me know your thoughts, see what you think. And if you haven't seen my review of the game, check it out on the channel. Cheers, guys.